Force is all talk, but if action is not taken soon, this will be the last generation of southern resident killer whales. Nearly 4 dozen people, all different stakeholders, make up the governor's task force. On top of that, there are 3 working groups to address 3 threats to whales: vessels, prey, and contaminants. The group has until October 1st to give the governor a draft report of its recommendations to save the species. I checked in with several members to see if this task force has what it takes to think big and get results. The sight of a southern resident killer whale. It's enough to draw in visitors as far as Long Island, New York.
It would just be absolutely the pinnacle of my trip. It would just be amazing just to see it.
But in the San Juan Islands, people are seeing them less and less.
This May was the first May on record that we had 0 days of southern residents.
Jeff Friedman is president of the Pacific Whale Watch Association. Studies have found excessive boat noise can make it harder for whales to find food using echolocation. So some would argue Friedman's industry is part of the problem. He's serving on Governor Jay Inslee's task force to prove otherwise.
We're the most progressive and well-organized whale watching industry on the planet. We have guidelines that far exceed federal, state, and provincial regulations.
Guidelines that include slow speed zones and time limits on watching any group of whales. There's one scientific problem with blaming vessels for the demise of southern residents.
We're seeing the big killer whales, the transient orcas, more than we've ever seen them before, and they are thriving.
In transient killer whales, researchers find the ideal case study. Like the southern residents, they deal with the same pollution and boat noise in the greater Puget Sound. But for them, right now it's a non-issue, because unlike southern residents, they feed on seals and sea lions, and there's plenty. For southern residents, their food source is scarce. Chinook salmon is endangered, just like them.
So he's very robust, big bones, big teeth.
Ken Balcom is a lead researcher on orcas, and this is the skull of a transient killer whale. It's displayed at his outreach center in Friday Harbor. Balcom says this whale is built to eat other mammals, but southern residents can't make the switch.
If they bit a seal, they'd break their jaw. And they probably wouldn't have enough tooth structure there to hang on to them.
For him, the focus for saving southern residents is simple.
We got to deal with the Chinook issue. There's no question about it.
But there are plenty of questions on how to do it.
In the short term, there's actions we can take like adjusting hatchery production. But over the long term, we know we're going to need habitat restoration.
Lynn Berry works for NOAA, a federal voice on the governor's task force. She says Inslee is looking for them to make bold moves.
It's going to be challenging, and some of those actions are going to be less popular with some stakeholder groups.
Actions like breaching dams in the Snake River. According to Bonneville Power Administration, the Columbia River Basin produces more hydropower than any other river system in North America. But according to Balcom, it also used to produce a lot more Chinook.
The biggest watershed was in the Columbia and Snake River Basin. That was 12 million fish. That was a huge amount of fish. Damming those rivers up and preventing access to their spawning grounds was the coup de grace for Chinook salmon.
In other words, a deadly blow. Turning off the turbines could restore habitat, but it would come at a cost.
We're going to make them as bold as we can.
I sat down with task force co-chair Stephanie Solin to see if dams are on the table.
Well, everything's on the table, and we're looking at dams and their impacts. There are a lot of people that believe those dams are important to their livelihoods. You have other people who feel that if those dams would come down, it would do a great deal to restore habitat for salmon. And so,
where do you stand?
I am not taking a position right now. I'm waiting to see where the task force is going to go.
If the science says this will help restore habitat, save the Chinook and save the orcas, does the task force have the will to go up against tough bodies like Bonneville Power to make that happen?
I just don't know at this point. It's hard to comment on until we're kind of at that place. But really what we're looking at right now is the larger Salish Sea. There are lots of things we can do here that are challenging, but not quite the heavy lift politically.
I'm hearing two different things. I'm hearing we want to take really bold actions, and then I'm hearing, well, maybe that's too heavy of a lift.
Well, in the short term, we've got to be looking at what is going to have the quickest impact in the next 2 years. The whole debate around dams is something that is longer term. It's not an easy fix. You've got complicated politics, and that's not going to save the Orca in the next 2 years.
Not in the next 2 years, but you said the task force would go there.
I said that everything's on the table.
The task force is required to recommend long-term solutions. But one thing is true. The Southern residents don't have much time for results.
We've got maybe at most 5 more years of reproductive life in this population to make it happen. And if we don't do it in that 5 years, it isn't going to happen.
And for a man who has spent more than 4 decades tracking Southern residents for the government, his role on the task force is conditional.
If we don't have a decision that is leaning heavily on prey restoration and is still going in all these directions of toxins and vessels and 4 H's, hatchery, habitat, harvest, hydropower, I'll just throw up my hands and I'll count whales until we get down to 70. And then I'll give the project back to the government.
A government tasked with protecting this Puget Sound icon. Governor Inslee says orcas are part of the soul of Washington State. Tomorrow at 4 p.m., he joins me live to talk about his task force and how much political will he's willing to risk to save the Southern residents.